have stories. Every single one of us. From the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, we all have stories. Exploring the world for the greatest stories of all time.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show.
The Aron O'Dowd Show. Our soul is the screen upon which we project our dreams. What's your story?
Hello and welcome. Oh my god, my first live stream show. Wow, the Aron O'Dowd Show. And I wonder what kind of guest I have today. He's video editing, testimonials. I think he has his own disability of his own. Let's find out. Hello and welcome to the show, Tommy. How are you doing?
Good to see you. I'm in good spirits.
Fantastic. Tommy, at the age of 4, you didn't speak. Is that right? Tell us all about that.
No, I did speak, just not a great deal. So my parents worried about that a little bit. They sent us to be checked by doctors. I was observed for a few days. Doctors went back and said, no problems with this guy. We only found out later on that I had Aspergers. And that was the reason for, language and social skills. I mean, I could talk a lot, but my social skills and ability to read people were a bit behind the times back then.
How did it impact you?
Well, I used to get beaten up a lot at school. I couldn't read people. I didn't know when they were making jokes. I didn't know when I'd offended people. I had no idea about what people were saying about us, really, because a lot of it is what's not said or how something's said, especially humor. And when I was saying things, I couldn't read the impacts that it was having on other people, good or bad.
Did it frustrate you?
Didn't even know it was a problem until years later. Only in my mid-20s did I realize that was the reason I was isolated and why all the Mickey taking was happening. So it did then, yeah, eventually. But I didn't even know half the time it was going on. People just used to carry on taking the Mickey.
What is your superpower?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Aaron.
What is your superpower?
I can interview really well. I can read when people have got more to say. I can tease it out of them. And I can make sure I can whittle it down when I'm filming it to know what people are going to take an interest in or not, especially when it comes to business and marketing.
Wow, and when did you discover this skill?
I don't know if it was a discovery. It was just something I was doing. I was a photographer for a while of actors. I ended up moving into video work, as people do, because those cameras did video and photography at the same time. And I went to film school, and then I was making whatever videos needed doing for local businesses. And then at some point, somebody wanted me. I was with one of my clients, and I asked him, because I knew the client, and as well as I did. So let me start again. So at some point, I was sat down with one of my clients and his client, because I was filming my client do his job, which was social media. And I jokingly said, because I knew them both, and you can kind of take the mick out of each other a little bit or ask rather candid questions, why did you pick him, to work with? And I had the camera with me at the time, and he started stroking his chin, the client's client, like Ming the Merciless, and started really thinking about it. And I thought, press the record button without really wondering what I was going to get out of it. And he said, well, at first I didn't want him to do it. I wanted to do all that social media stuff myself, but then I've got 10 vans to drive around, or at least organize, and all the staff and all the logistics of running a business. So reluctantly, I got him to do it. And then over time, I noticed that his language on social media sounded like the way I talk. And I liked that. I was quite happy with it. Something to that effect. And I stopped recording, didn't think anything of it, supplied what I promised to supply, which wasn't that. And then I got a phone call from my client later on. Tommy, where's that video? What video? Oh, the video where I'm with him, doing what not. And I go, I have no idea what you're on about. And when he finally explained what I actually, was supposed to get to him, I says, I've ditched that. We never came to do that. So he panics and says, oh God, what have you done? And he kept chasing me to find this video. And eventually I found it buried in one hard drive, that I usually carried around at the time, getting battered by bags. And as soon as he got it, he put it on the internet straight away. The lightning bulb goes off in my head thinking, well, if he considers that of value, maybe there's something in it. Then not long later, I saw a video by a guy called Stephen Thomas who said, why don't you try sell your smallest offering, why don't you try sell your smallest service? And I thought, well, the smallest one would be just interviewing people about, the smallest one would be interviewing people about how happy they were with somebody's service. So I'll test that out. Tried it on an accountant's, filmed about 6 people, said it was for free. They were so happy they wanted to pay 100 quid for it. And I was like, oh God, I got 100 quid. I'm happy. Wow, somebody gave me money I didn't expect. Then I went to a local B&I chat and just told them, I do this. I just film people talking about why your service is so great. And a lot of people said, oh, brilliant. So you don't film us? Fantastic. Right, here's some money. Go off and do it. And that I was on my way. So it was kind of by accident.
Are a lot of things in your life that made you successful just happen out of nowhere?
Not out of nowhere, but I worked in corporate. I worked in a call center. So people on the spectrum, corporate can be a pretty brutal place. They haven't got time to, take into consideration what your particular needs are. So for me, ironically, in the call center, loud noises and buzzings and millions of voices stress me out. So I prefer to work in a room with nobody else in it, quietly. I got loads done, but they didn't like that because they like watching people, having kind of somebody over your shoulder, monitoring how many times you go to the toilet. So, and there was a lot of, in a corporate world, there's a lot of piss taking. That's it. There is a lot of people making fun of you. So I didn't quite enjoy that too much. And if I was still there, I'd probably be going out of my head. When I actually left, there was a payment form at the end of it, or a leavers form that said, do not rehire. So I was never going to fit into that world. And if I was there back now, I'd really struggle. So it was a matter of survival. I wouldn't fit.
It's interesting how we fit in certain environments. You tell us about Can and how you run the streets and practice social skills.
Well, I didn't know I was doing it at the time. So, I was out networking till 4 a.m, thinking that this was going to get, my then potential film career off the ground. And to get to know people, they've got to like you. They've got to want to stick around and talk and, and go to other bars and take you along with them and, have some good adventures. And the trouble is that I didn't seem that really easy to socialize with. So you could talk for ages, but then you get worn out trying to talk and, make yourself look interesting. What actually people prefer, especially creative people, is feeling like there's a spotlight on them, that you're interested in what they've got to say. And you should genuinely be interested in what they've got to say. So you ask them about, their journey, what their opinions are, what they care about. And suddenly when they feel the spotlight's on them, they open up. And rather than just kind of taking that as an opportunity to say, oh, well, this is my version of events, you actually get them to dive deeper into their version of events, their journey. And they like that even more. So that's how I built up my network. And when I ended up doing video, that's an asset, that's a skill and an asset I used in business.
You've spent a long time studying video and directing and so on. Tell us about that.
I just watched a lot of movies, mainly from when I worked in a video store. So me not wanting to do anything of a miserable job, I wanted to be a creative. So I ended up going to film school, tried to get in for 2 years, struggled because I can't do interviews very well in the get a job sense. And that is not a thing that probably people on the spectrum have ever found easy, unless they've had a real bit of practice on it. And I was eventually allowed in. And, that's what I really liked doing. You could call it one way of avoiding a proper job, but, a lot of people from creative backgrounds end up in corporate and doing, or leading companies because they think outside the box. How
did it feel not getting the interview?
Crushed. I stayed at home for 2 years, didn't go out, overate, looked at the ceiling, didn't turn the TV on.
That must have been hard.
Yeah, nothing else to do. Didn't go out much, as I said. Didn't have much of a social life. Film was my thing. That was the only thing I had going.
So film must have been a therapy for you to dive into the aspects of and creativity.
It was just interesting. It was a window to the world. You know, there are more approaches to filmmaking than there are religions. You know, and it was fascinating. You know, when you are living in one small corner of Leeds and you are watching films from Japan, Spain, literally a lot of people's first impression of a new place is through film. You know, a lot of people's first impression over ideas is through film. So it was my window to the world, and I found it fascinating.
What do you find fascinating about it?
The window, well, I guess I've answered it, but, you know, the fact it is a window into new worlds. You know, my cousin went to Japan, and I think a lot that had to do with him watching a copy of a film called Battle Royale, which is extremely brutal, but that was a window into, you know, seeing more of Japanese film and culture, and eventually going there with his family.
And you probably spent every hour studying video. What is Tommy's favorite video he likes to watch?
The one I've seen the most times is Trainspotting, but compared to a lot of people, I've probably only seen that 10. You know, I get actually quite bored by watching the same film more than once or twice. I need to kind of leave it for years before I see it again, which ironically is not what filmmakers do. They study it to death, which kills it for me, you know. But it was probably Trainspotting. It had a very rebellious, sarcastic, I would say Scottish actually rather than British, you know, because they could look into the gutter and still come out laughing.
Wow, that's kind of interesting. I mean, you watch something 10 times, do you know the script? You kind of think, I haven't seen that, see this, so on.
I need to leave. You might think 10 times is a lot, but more. I've known people that have seen Lord of the Rings 50 times in the cinemas. You know, a lot of people have an obsession with their favorite film. That is kind of mild numbers compared to most people. My parents detested that film. They'd never seen it, but they still detested it, what it stood for, because that was probably one reason I liked it. You know, we're all rebels, aren't we, at heart, you know, especially as teenagers. You know, but yeah, that's, you know, 10 times seeing a film is nothing. I've just seen so many others that there's no time to watch a film that many.
How did your family help and support you to get where you need to be?
They supported me by giving me a nice home. They didn't tell me to do anything else, you know, but I left home at 16. No, sorry, let me rephrase that. I was kind of on my way out of home when I was 16, 17, going back and forth from the countryside to Leeds. You know, and by the time I was 18, I had my own council flat, which at the time was quite unusual. Most people don't, but I'd made a decision to go back to Leeds, and that's, you know, thanks to my grandmother, I ended up with one. So I was living alone from 18, which is fairly unusual. And sorry, to answer your question, I didn't really fully answer it.
No,
I mean, after that, they just wanted to, you know, my mother passed away when I was 16. So my father didn't interfere and just let me do my thing. You know, I was never going to kind of listen to any, you know, adult member of my family anyway about what was a good career. I got told to do an IT career because that's what I was studying. But really, I never felt like there was going to be a permanent future in IT compared to anything else. And I think the times have really borne that out. You know, the more technology evolved, the more shrinkage there was in jobs, the more insecure those jobs became, and the fewer of them they're going to be. You know, somebody once told me that, and somebody once told me, who I hold in high authority, that eventually a lot of people will just be, reduce is the wrong word, but a lot of people will end up in carers careers because that's one of the few things that's left solid, or construction, you know, where you need hands. You know, and I never really saw, I'd say, as a long-term career, or at least one where I could feel confident it was going to be as stable as anything else. So I just went off and did film and eventually found my way into this.
Wow. With your mom passing away, how did that impact you?
The family for a while died. You know, we all fell our own way and drifted in our own paths. She was the glue that held it together. And after that, I just decided I wasn't going to do anything that people told me was a prosperous life. You know, I just thought I could die anytime soon, you know, and I became a hypochondriac. So I do get constant reminders that, you know, nothing's permanent, and that I wasn't going to follow anybody's designated path.
I see, and all the success you create, you wish she was here to see the success you've created.
I don't dwell on that. You can't bring the dead back. As much as I'd like to, I don't think about it. You know, I have pictures. She lives on in the family, but I can't revive what was. Do you know what I mean? People can drive themselves crazy thinking about people can drive themselves nuts thinking about that, and I'm not going to start.
No, I get that. And what, like, you're doing IT, you're filming, you're doing all these stuff, but what was that pivotal moment in your life realized, you know, I am making some level of success and people seeing?
Sorry, Aaron, you got cut off a little bit towards the end of your sentence.
So what was success for you at that time?
Well, you get out of film school and then you find the world is a very difficult place to make a living, you know, and not everybody's going to hire you straight off the bat, and the competition for places is ridiculous. And somebody who's a slow learner like me is not easily going to get on a film set. You know, I had an interview at the best film school in the country, which is really, really hard to get. But they didn't want me to just walk out of one film school and into another, theirs. You know, they wanted me to have some industry experience. But, you know, getting industry experience is not an easy thing to do when you really need to get your way around cliques and social groups that often spend that time drinking in bars, you know, and surviving in, you know, expensive parts of the country. So I was never really good at that. And I used to see people on film sets doing set photography who didn't even have the right equipment, but were in the right bar at the right time, you know, which requires a certain amount of maintenance. And maybe I could have worked harder on that, you know, but it just didn't go that way. So, you know, I was for a long while just surviving, you know, just making enough money to live. I was trying to do that through photographing actors and then making video for, you know, people's social media in the early days, or whatever they wanted me to do. Whatever I got asked to do, I did. Usually not brilliantly because it wasn't my flame. But, you know, you just kind of go from one thing to the next, adapt, survive, and then find the thing that is working well.
Is it correct that you made short films in between this?
Yeah, I made short films because they would get you into Cannes, and then you would get a badge that you didn't have to pay 500 quid for, or whatever it is now, 400 quid back then, you know, which was a hefty chunk of money when you hadn't got much. And then I would, you know, say I've got a short film in Cannes, nice little bit of validity, even though it pretty much ended up on a tiny little computer screen rather than actually having a proper screening. But it got me, you know, the right to go around there and, you know, network with other filmmakers, many of whom, the ones I care about, are still my friends and still keep doors open. You know, some of them, when I was focusing on more business content, were letting me crash in their homes in London or taking us out, you know, and still being supportive. So no complaints.
I'm still blown away. Your little short films. I'm thinking, wow, I wonder what they were about, you know?
Some of them one of them got me into film school, but I'm kind of embarrassed about it, so I don't really show it off. And I keep it that way, you know. I still watch it every now and then to remember what I could do well and what I was good at. And who knows, I might do more of that later on. You know, it was at the time a bit esoteric, as some people would say, you know, like a bit vague. Nobody knew what was going on, and you pretend that's what you wanted to do on purpose. I actually went the opposite of that, especially in business. You know, the more clear you are, the more explicit, the easier it is to get your point across. So I went from one extreme to the other. These days, when I do videos for business, I don't like any ambiguity. I like to get things nailed on to what I'm trying to say, or what my client is trying to say, or their client is trying to say.
What was that pivotal point to transfer from artistic creativity to business creativity for people?
I don't think there was a specific moment. It was just I needed money, and somebody put their hand out and said, "Here's some cash, help us out. You just do what you need to do to survive." And at the time, it was doing videos for businesses, mainly testimonials. You take the money, but you take the money doing something that you like, and you're a uniquely able problem solver. You'd rather do something that nobody else can, because if you do something that everybody else is doing and other people do better, then it's harder to justify a decent pay wage. And then you end up, kind of battling out with everybody else for diminishing returns and lower income.
What is the problem that you solve, Tommi, for people?
I meet hidden gems, real experts who are uniquely gifted and are better than pretty much nearly everybody else on the planet at doing what they do. But nobody knows about it, or nobody believes it until they see what the clients have had to say, or until they've actually had a decent conversation with them. So I turn people from hidden gems into global treasures. And I do that using video testimonials and introduction videos.
Wow, I love that. Going from the rocks in the ground to the diamonds in the world. That's fantastic,
That's a nice way of putting it. I might steal
that. And where was that point where you realized, hey, I can take someone and turn them into amazing for their testimonials, for their business?
Well, some of the people I work with are already established. And when I say hidden gems, I don't mean hidden that they're like so far out of sight, they're not busy helping people. You know what I mean? But some people are very good, but in a local sense to others, right? Some people are well known locally, not regionally, not nationally. And if you didn't live in the area, you might not have heard of them, and they can't go to somebody in another region so easily and say, oh, let's have a conversation, The bait does not exist. So I've been creating the bait to get people outside the area, outside their circle of friends and business contacts, hooked and working with them. It used to be that you met everybody in person. Now you don't. It's a little bit easier to at least get the initial attention of somebody who you haven't met before in person. But before, that was very difficult.
What are the school of hard knocks you learned going through this process to be the person who creates the hidden to the success for people?
Forgive me, because sometimes I'm not great with ambiguity. The question might be a little broad for me. Can you give me anything more deep on that?
Sure, yeah. So how do you identify people to come on and make them from the hidden gem to the successful gem in their videos?
One of my favorite shows used to be The Wire. Well, it was when it was on. And it had the cliche, but the brilliantly executed cliche of a cop that had probably annoyed somebody many years ago and had been demoted to the basement. You didn't even know they existed. And their talents were still the same. And all they needed was bringing back out into the open again. I just met them by chance. Or, I'd be looking at people with their skill set because they were the kind of people I could help. But I didn't necessarily know that they were hidden. It was only until I knew how good they were and how local they pretty much existed, that I realized that, wow, people haven't actually met this person. It's ridiculous. So I made an effort because they were my client and they trusted me with their money, their hard earned. And I made it a mission to get them in front of other people, or give it whatever advice after I'd done the initial testimonial video to get them in front of other people, to connect them with people who could open doors for them. I became an advocate as much as a service provider.
Wow. Is there anything that you would wish and want to change in everything you've done to get to this point?
Be a little bit less lazier. I'd have probably been a lot more further ahead. But, I try to not work on any sense of urgency. And that usually means that I can make less urgent decisions, which means that I don't, make any decisions under pressure. I don't take the dollar for the sake of the dollar. I help the people I want to help.
Wow. And being on the spectrum, does that affect your work or does that enhance it in any way?
I used to think it doesn't these days, but little things that I've been made a little bit more aware of, maybe in the pandemic or post-pandemic, I've reduced the amount of meetings I do. I used to do about 250 and think, great, but then, you got to do your job when work comes in. But at the same time, I started to getting a little bit fatigued or overwhelmed by the number of calls I was doing, the number of Zoom meetings with about 50 people on it or 80, and it was like being back at school again where you're meant to sit there, and I was struggling to absorb just information in silence, I was being bombarded with it. And there's only so much of that I can take during any given month. So I had to reduce that and just focus it on, like one-on-one phone calls with people from time to time. There is sometimes an overload of information. So I had to manage that so I wouldn't feel stressed out. And when it came to my workload, I could get still a decent amount of it done during the daytime. So it was kind of managing, the overwhelm. Hence, I still live in Gozo, which is probably one of the most sedate places you can exist in.
I wonder how a guy from UK ends up in Malta. There's a story there, you know?
There is. Can I get a swig of water just
Yeah, go ahead.
to burning out, talking too much? Just give me one moment.
Yeah, no worries. Living in
I mean, it's very quick.
yeah, no worries. You know,
Right next to us, excuse me.
that's the thing is you're talking a lot. You need a lot of water and living in places like Malta and Spain, sweating and thinking, like I have to have the AC on all the time, and it's hard, and you probably experienced the same, Tommy. But for me in August, I was sweat dripping on Zoom, and everything is like, this is not real. The AC has to be on. I have to have a conversation with Mother Nature,
I relate to that being on a Mediterranean island, which is extremely close to North Africa, just like yourself in where you are. I had to make a point of like going to work essentially in air-conditioned bars for the summer and making sure I was out on time going to those places, which sounds a bit like co-working, but I prefer it when my co-workers speak a language half the time. They all know English, but they prefer to speak in Maltese half the time, which is great because I can tune out. I don't understand it. I can focus. And they're all kind of socializing, doing their own thing, and having a tea, coffee, or a beer or whatever. That's nobody's coming to distract me. Do you know what I mean? So it was a decent environment. But during the summer, sweat dripping like mad.
Tell us how you end up in Malta, Tommy.
This is a long story. I've recounted it a few times. But my grandfather, let me go back. My great-grandfather, over 100 years ago, got sickness because he was near a dead soldier in Belgium. That's what I believe to be the story. And they sent him to Malta to recover because there wasn't as much going on there at the time, fighting-wise. So he was here. He was swimming in the Mediterranean every day before boats were around, to pose a danger to doing that, or at least in certain waters, swimming in the harbour. He loved it. Went to his wife, says, let's go live in Malta. And she goes, no. So that was it. My grandfather came here after the Second World War. He didn't talk about that so much because his experiences of war were harrowing. He saw a few people die in not nice ways. But he was on an airbase called Sahali around just after the Second World War. He goes home. He doesn't say quite as much, but obviously my dad's heard loads of stories from his grandfather, my great-grandfather, about Malta, So he takes us as kids to Melilla, which is in the north. And we have a great time, sun, sea, by the pool, seeing places. It's got a tremendous history. People are coming out to film it. Again, it was the location for Midnight Express. It was used for Gladiator. Oliver Reed died here. Gladiator 2's been filmed here. Jurassic Park's been filmed here. And I think Mel Gibson's filming a series. So it gets used for locations because of its history and the way it was built. And I, years later, having been full of memories of jumping off boats in the sea, seeing all the beautiful caves with their crystal-like, interiors, and it being the holiday that after my man passed away, they all talked about. I did a trip with a friend. They paid for it. I was that broke, even though the flights were 15 quid and the whole flats were about 30 quid a night, for about 4 days. And I went to a BNI meeting while I was here on the other island. So it was a 6-hour round trip. I met somebody who was substituting for somebody else that day. And he took my card and says, "Oh, testimonial videos, maybe we'll need that." He was in SEO. So these two sync a little bit. But I didn't think in the life of me he was ever going to make a call and say, "When are you coming back?" So one of my friends, another one, had bought me a 70 quid, Ryanair voucher. And I used it on flights to go back to Malta and do the job. I was, still a bit tight at the time. So I flew over, filmed his client who'd rescheduled a flight so he could be, around to do the filming. It went well. Filmed a load of other people for this guy. Then, would come back and forth trying to build a post-Brexit market up because it didn't look good for the UK back then, and I don't think it looks too good right now. And that's all I considered Malta as, not a living destination, just a working one occasionally. I was spending about 8 weeks of every year, spread out for about 2 years. And that's how it was going. I even did a short film with a friend. I was doing the camera work and he was the director. And then suddenly, pandemic, we're locked down, we can't go anywhere. 3 months later, doors open up a little bit. My friend, who I've known through a hostel owner, says, "Do you want to crash at our place? Just pay us expenses." I was like, "Yeah, okay." By coincidence, my flat was ending its lease around about 2 weeks later. So, as fate would have it, I booked a plane, went out there, went for nearly a couple of months, went back to stay in, good stead with the tax. And while I was isolated at my father's, all I saw every day was Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock saying, "Oh, don't worry, just go about your lives," stuff like that. "Don't worry, we need the UK back on its feet, just go do what you want." And I got really panicked about that because I'm a hypochondriac, So I booked a flight a week later, and I thought I was taking a risk doing that because I was convinced we were going to shut the doors down again on both sides. I went out as soon as I could. 2 weeks later, I think they shut the borders. 6 weeks later, my dad got COVID. It was a mild case, thank God for that. It's a bit of a lottery. And I didn't see my family again for 10 months. By which point, I'd, by random luck, qualified for a post-Brexit residency. I didn't take it until pretty much the last minute. If you're here on, is it like the 1st of January or 31st of December 2020 or 1st of January 2021, you get a residency for 10 years. They were giving them out to Brits right, left and centre as long as you were here, because they like British pensioner money, probably. And I didn't take it straight away until the last minute, and then decided to stay because I got used to living here. It's a bit different from back home. A lot of people enjoy it. And then I just built my business to work remotely because I'd started doing that during the pandemic, and people didn't really care if I traveled or not. People didn't really care if I was using a fancy camera. They just wanted to make sure that they could hear the person, see the person clearly, and above anything else, what they were saying about them as clients, or them as service providers. And as long as they were saying nice things, that's what they wanted. And that's just the way it's been growing since then.
Wow. And, when we met the first time was an opportunity after Brexit. We're in a breakout room and you're telling me all these stories, and it's like, wow, this guy is a cool guy. And here we are now. It's funny how the world of networking works,
Yeah. I came here originally just to survive. I was panicked about COVID. People can say you're crazy or that's a sensible thing. But, I lived in Leeds. and Leeds United won the title and got promoted after 16 odd years, which might mean nothing to a lot of people, but you can imagine the humiliation that happened when they got relegated and the happiness that they had when they got promoted. Sadly, that happened during COVID year, when all the stadiums were starting to be empty. And what did a lot of fans do? They went out and got drunk in the square and partied, and and you could say that spread a bit of COVID, and I freaked out about that amongst other things. So, I kind of went where I just felt like there was a lot of space between people, and here was it.
I know you said Malta is a very place for you to work, but living there more, do you feel like you're able to be free? It's kind of like your life now,
It is my life now. I've got pretty used to it, although sometimes I have to look out on the balcony I'm in front of and think, bloody hell, is this where I live? But Malta is an island distinct from Gozo as an island, and everybody living here will tell you that. Gozo's more like the serene holiday destination, but it hasn't got as much of the corporate job opportunities, or the government positions that Malta does. But people often prefer the party life, and big social events and whatnot. Gozo has plenty of those throughout the year, but it's a bit more of a rural type place, a bit more chilled living, more like west of Ireland, maybe, rather than Dublin, if that makes any sense. That's the best analogy I can think of right now, and those are distinct enough to separate them, Malta is still more chilled than most cities, even though it's fairly dense population-wise, but Gozo is very chilled. And when you're running a business, it's nice to do it without distractions.
I would presume where you are, there's not a lot of distractions where you can deeply focus on business and film and video,
Exactly that. You pretty much half the time I'll find something to do work-wise because there's not as much socially, and I don't mean that in a complaining sense. I can go hang out with people if I want, and Malta's really not that far away if I want to go see people. But temptation's less. Cup of tea by the sea, laptop out. Crack on with stuff. This is the worst distraction I've got.
Why?
Is there anything more addictive than that? Probably not, but there you go.
Who would think that'd be addictive,
Yeah, what do you believe? I mean, you need it for work anyway, so you're never that far away from it.
What is the dream and legacy you want to leave behind, Tommi?
I would rather be the facilitator of other people's legacies rather than be, the legacy guy myself. I help people who are doing good things for other people, great things, they change lives. So helping them helps other people have a better life. So rather than sit at the front and, and be seen doing it, it's nice to just work behind the scenes and let really gifted people go and do their thing and be part of that. Get them in front of more people because they will change lives. And I'm happy enough helping facilitate that or helping make that happen.
When you're sitting behind the camera watching people give those testimonial moments that make people wow of the progress they've done, how does that feel?
Sometimes it's quite emotional because a lot of people don't reflect on their progress or how proud of themselves they are, and when I get to sit with people and get them to open up and say, how far have you come really? They've never thought about it, or at least they've not thought about it very much because they're in the daily grind dealing with whatever. So although I'm filming stuff for my client, often the people in front of the camera are actually looking, wow, I've had it pretty good, or it's turned out pretty well. I'm pretty happy. It's a bit like James Stewart, It's a Wonderful Life. I'm not saying life is wonderful for them necessarily, but they might be pretty happy with the way it's gone. And they often only realize that when they actually start talking about it with a neutral party.
Wow. What inspires you?
No idea. Movies, maybe. Watching films, watching the work of my heroes on screen. people that I've met through our shared networks, Sonic Youth, I don't know, listen to records, bands, whatever they're trying to get across. I've no idea, mate. I couldn't tell you.
No worries. And who are your heroes?
Cindy Lumet, Akira Kurosawa, Stanley Kubrick, those people, the likes Scorsese. I could watch a documentary on filmmaking for 3 hours and not notice the room is on fire.
Wow, that's incredible.
One of the best things I've ever seen, and I wonder if people who don't have any interest in filmmaking might actually find it worth watching, is there's a 3-hour documentary about the making of Blade Runner and the hell that people went through to get it made. That is endlessly fascinating because of the drama and the arguments and the hell that people went through to build this thing that's influenced people and popular culture, for ages. I usually daily will listen to, for calming purposes, an ambient piece of music that's usually influenced by the Blade Runner soundtrack, which is really weird to think that, influence has extended that far out. Do you know what I mean? I'll listen to that rather than people hitting singing bowls.
And that was my next question. What music you like listening to?
You probably can see, let me turn it around a little bit. That's just on my window ledge. That's a bunch of CDs. And that's a fairly tall shelving unit of CDs. So it's very hard to answer that question. I would say there's a fair amount of post-punk in there. A decent amount of 80s US alt rock, but it's pretty spread wide.
Wow.
Take Poison. I usually like seeing what people pick up when they come to visit.
That is some collection.
One of my goals is, when other priorities have been met, like buying a house without debt, is to buy a fancy sound system. Because I think when you listen to music, you should listen to it well. You want to eat good food, you want to enjoy your dinners, you might as well enjoy your music.
Oh, for sure. Music is so important that you gotta have it blasting through the house, and it creates a home,
And believe it or not, that it is a case of diminishing returns, but the more you usually do spend on good equipment, the more striking that music will sound. And the more it impacts your environment when you listen to it.
Tommy, you and I network a lot, and we kind of dance in similar circles. What does networking provide for you?
A living and the chance to actually make an impact in life on others, a good one.
Wow. And would you be lost without networking?
I was doing it when I was solely focused on filmmaking. I'd have been lost then. You are nothing without your network, and the people without one are usually stuck in a corporate job they hate.
And how does BNI help you?
It helps me like ECI does in many respects. We both know each other through ECI, for example, Entrepreneurs Community International. That's almost like heavy duty referral training and community. But, it gives me the chance, BNI gave me the chance to have conversations with people that never would have been allowed to happen because they wouldn't have made the time had I not actually, said, I'm going to commit to trying to support other people first. And when they see that you've got that in front of you, they will give you the time. It might lead somewhere, it might not, but a lot of means that never would have been allowed to happen a lot of meetings that never would have been allowed to happen did happen because of that. So it got me off the ground, whereas I might never got off the ground. You know, a lot of people kind of spread themselves very far and wide, you know, and but I use it also for the hive mind, you know, the shared brain. A lot of the time with problem solving, you do sometimes need a wide variety of voices. Sometimes there is no such thing as too many voices. Sometimes, yeah, but a lot of the time, no. You're trying to find solutions, especially during the pandemic, you know. And I found it very handy then for educating me on things that would get me out of a jam. And often it's the collective brain that's really handy. So that's as much as what I use it for as anything else. And I expect it'll be handy for when the next catastrophe happens, if it does.
We'll see. But how do you manage being in these network with someone sorry, let me ask this again. Are you socially challenged in these networks, or does this give you space to allow the mind to be in flow?
I still don't quite grasp the question, sorry, but let me see if I've got it right. You know, are you asking from a point of view of in general, or, you know, being on the spectrum?
Both.
I'll try to answer you know, it would be hard to answer the first one because I didn't fully grasp the meaning, forgive me. But from the point of view of being on the spectrum, even in a big network like BNI, you will meet, or ECI, you'll meet people randomly that you didn't expect to meet. But at some point, you have to focus your energy and your time. Certain people, you see it's working. I always think there's room for somebody else interesting to enter the world, so you can never put the shutters fully down. But at the same time, at some point, you have to get really focused. Rather than trying to cast a net widely and trying to do a lot with a lot of people, more comes with spending more time with fewer people. And so that's usually the way I manage it. And if I didn't, as I said, being on the spectrum, the overwhelm would be a bit too much. And it did get too much a few times. It's a process trying to figure out how to manage time and politely say, I'm really sorry, I haven't got time for this. One of the things I do is if somebody wants to meet me and it's even like an introduction from somebody I like, I say, okay, great. Please can you fill out this form? And this form I'm talking about will usually have a list of who they want to talk to and the traits that help me understand that better, what I would see, what mindset those people have, what mindset is present in the people they don't want to talk to, you know, what things they might see amongst the officers of people they don't want to talk to. So getting a really clear idea. And when I send that form, some people don't fill it out. And I realize they're not action takers. And I can very easily say, great, you know, I don't need to worry about that person because they won't do the bare minimum. So I'm finding ways of filtering people out in the politest sense. And that makes it easier to manage.
Mm-hmm. You know, in having a different view of the world through the senses, do you wish that you were not on the spectrum in any way?
I don't know any other way. You know, it's all I know. Why worry about what other people have got? Why not make the best of what you have? And I know that sounds a bit high and mighty if somebody's in a really bad position, but you know, at one point I was struggling at school. Now, in theory, I'm the best at what I do compared to anyone else, which sounds a bit arrogant, but I'm allowed to think that. So why envy anyone? You know, I'm in the boat to, you know, make the most of that. I'm in the boat to do well because of that. So why be the envy of anyone?
Do you feel that you've mastered the skills that you have to be a video expert?
There is no such thing as having mastered something. We're always learning more. And if we don't, then the world will overtake us. So I'm always keeping eyes out for what is available to serve people better. I don't build silver bullets. I don't work with silver bullet hunters because that is not something that will help people continuously improve. It'll just help people who are trying to put out fires and then are always trying to put out the next fire and the next fire. They're never thinking forward. Whereas if you are working with people who are looking at things from just taking, or if you're working with people who are just trying to get better step by step, then you're always finding new problems to solve and learning through that. And that is, for me, a way that'll always keep you in front, you know, and not having to look over your shoulder too much, rather than being overtaken easily.
If you could go back and advise your younger self, Tommy, what advice would you give?
I probably wouldn't, because I might have taken a very different path and not made a few mistakes. And also, yeah, it's difficult. I know that's a common question to ask, but I don't know if I would have said any different. You know, be a little bit less lazy. But then again, what I've learned, what I know now, I don't know. You know, the reason I, although I hear that question a few times, the reason I struggle with it or don't always kind of want to give a direct answer to it is because it sounds like what is going on now was always going to be set in stone, and what's coming is always set in stone, right? You know, there is still time for us to adapt where we're going, you know, based upon what's happening and use what we know. I don't regret, you know, picking up the knowledge that I have or how I got there too much. I'm not saying that there's nothing to regret. I just don't spend time thinking it should have been different.
The journey you're on now and the journey you want to be, what would that look like if you could mix it up and make the future happen?
Do you know what? I've hit a point where I'm not exactly sure what that is. I'm still figuring it out. I'd like to serve more of the people I want to help, and that's always an ongoing process. You know, you've always got a little bit of room for taking on extra people, but at the same time, on more of the right. Let me phrase that. There's always a bit of room to take on a couple more of the right people. You know, but aside from that, I would rather go out and travel a little bit more, DJ abroad. So I've done that before and I enjoyed it, and spend a little bit more time outside of the work stuff, you know, because I think one world feeds the other, you know, do a little bit more stuff that connects me with people outside of business. You know, I like the community in music, you know, dance music. So I'd rather sometimes focus a little bit more on that for a bit of fun, but not the neglect of what I'm doing, you know. So I hope that helps. Maybe more fly some of my mates over, you know, my family, you know, and see more of them. I don't have to necessarily leave, you know. So that is more my future. But in terms of a concrete, you know, like it's going to look like this and this and this, I have still not quite worked out what that's going to be.
I'm still thinking in my head, you raving music and dance. That's an image to be faced, you know.
I'm an introvert. I don't dance. I like to just play. I enjoy seeing, you know, the extroverts on the floor. That'll satisfy me.
Wow. Tommy, what advice would you give people if they came up and asked you, hey, can I have some advice from you?
Can you be more specific as to what advice that they'd be asking about?
So like advice of, you know, in business or in video, kind of like the expertise and the skill sets you have.
Well, we talk to Lee a lot and we hear from Lee a lot. And there's other people also that, you know, I would say have a lot to say on that subject of value. But you can be the dumbest person on the planet, almost, right? And yet somehow you can always be coming out on top. I'm not saying it pays to be dumb, because you'll get found out at some point. But, you know, the proof of people who are dumb often being, you know, successful, despite that, is people who are born into money and somehow are still floating. I'm not saying that people who are born into money are dumb, but somehow it can be a little bit easier to navigate the world because they've got their network. You know what I mean? I probably should have said born into a network rather than money, but you know what I mean? People who are kind of already established in that kind of sphere will always find the right people who can help them because they're already in that world. So to take that into what advice I'd give to people, I'd say work on your network. Focus on the people who can open doors for you, because if you've got no money, you've got that. And trust me, that is usually worth more than most of the money that people have, even the rich people.
I guess that was your secret hot sauce, the network, when you were at those low points where you didn't have the money to get where you need to go.
When I had no money, next to zero, and I was praying that Rishi Sunak would pull out his finger and actually support people who were struggling when all the work stopped during COVID early on, all the self-employed people. I was not destitute, but I was really struggling, and what could I do? I ended up taking out a subscription on a card app that prints it, for you and sends it to people, and sent a bunch of cards to my network while I had nothing else to do. I worked on my network. I sent fun cards to people. They often said things like, stop worrying and do more SEO if they were in marketing, for example, or stop worrying and look at the accounts again if they were in accounting. Something that was relevant to them, or maybe like I'd grab a picture of memes off the internet relating to somebody's trade, and I'd send them that and a bit of a nice note at the end of it. I would do whatever was relevant to people's world, personalize a load of cards and send them off to people. And that made my network with people that I already knew even more solid, and forwarded some of those relationships by years. And probably, aside from, getting to know good people like yourself and Lee, it was probably the single most important thing I did in business, because the doors started opening up in the long run. Maybe not immediately, maybe not for the first year, the second year, but they always remembered us. And many of those cards sit on people's desks to this day. So, that's an example of it, but just going out your way to support your network, sending an email of some interesting news article. People are not really considerate these days because they're too busy, and that is usually the thing that will get you a door open when people see you at a party and say, oh, come over here, Aaron. You should talk to this guy. This is Aaron. He's a solid man, right? That one introduction can open countless doors, and not a lot of people can see beyond the immediate dollar. Or the euro, given I'm in Europe.
Tommi, where can we find you, Tommi?
Well, I'm a Google whack, given my name, so I'm easy enough to find that way. LinkedIn is probably the best way to find us. I'm always there. I'm an addict, so I'll probably not be leaving it alone for too long.
Tommi, it was a blast, and thank you so much for sharing, man, and coming on. It's been a huge blast.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate the questions. You say more with maybe 4 or 5 words in a question than most people do with paragraphs.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and looking forward to the next amazing episode of the Aron O'Dowd Show.
Thank you for listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show, where the world's best stories are told. If you like, please post a review or subscribe to the show. To find out more, contact us at aronodowd.com. That's ARONODOWD.com. We're always ready to share another magnificent tale from the world's best storytellers. So stay tuned and rock on.